U.S. troops fired tear gas in Baghdad to break up a second day of protests at the U.S. embassy there. Donald Trump saying he's sending 750 more troops to the Middle East after protesters turned out in anger at deadly U.S. airstrikes against pro-Iranian fighters. The death toll rises in Australia as bushfires continue to rage across the country. The government has deployed naval ships to aid with evacuations. And thousands take to the streets of Hong Kong for a New Year's Day protest capping off 6 months of pro-democracy demonstrations. Hello, everyone. A very happy New Year to you all. Those are the headlines for you on this first day of 2020. I'm Jeannie Godula in Paris. First, the United States is sending in 750 soldiers to Iraq and the surrounding area after protesters attacked the U.S. embassy in Baghdad. A rapid response team of Marines is already on the way, with the U.S. saying up to 3,000 more could be sent in the coming days. Protesters broke into the heavily guarded compound on Tuesday, taking over security kiosks outside the embassy and at times setting them on fire. They turned out again today for that second day of protests, with U.S. troops firing tear gas at times to disperse them. Shirley Sitbon has the latest.
Protesters remained outside the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad for hours after the attack on the site, with Iraqi and U.S. forces trying to disperse the crowd. During the attack, a security post outside the facility was burned, but assailants failed to storm the main compound. Protests were led by Iranian-backed militias, and for the U.S., Tehran was behind the assault.
This is state-sponsored terror. This is Iranian-backed terrorism that took place that threatened American interests.
President Donald Trump tweeted, Iran will be held fully responsible for lives lost or damage incurred. They will pay a very big price. This is not a warning, it is a threat. The U.S. has already started redeploying 750 troops out of Kuwait, with Defense Secretary Mark Esper tweeting, this action was taken in response to increased threat levels against U.S. personnel and facilities. The attack on the embassy comes after U.S. strikes on Iran-backed militias fighting in Iraq that killed 25 people. Iran denied being involved.
America has the surprising audacity of attributing to Iran the protests of the Iraqi people against the savage killing of at least 25 Iraqis.
The unprecedented attack on the embassy is yet another escalation in the proxy conflict between the U.S. and Iran.
Rescue workers and naval ships are scrambling to reach thousands of people stranded in seaside towns in Australia now. At least 8 people have been reported killed in the past 24 hours alone. Deadly bushfires have ravaged several popular tourist destinations, and thousands more people have been forced to flee their homes. Our Sydney correspondent Rochelle Harrison-Pless has more.
Today, for many Australians, it's not a happy new year. Authorities say at least 200 homes were lost in the wake of devastating bushfires on the New South Wales south coast. Local media reports describe post-apocalyptic scenes there. Entire towns flattened, no power, no phone reception, no internet, fuel running out at petrol stations, massive queues to get into supermarkets, and shops running out of food and water. Meanwhile, in eastern Victoria, in the badly affected East Gippsland region, more than 60 properties were destroyed. In the seaside town of Malakuta, which made headlines yesterday when it became encircled by flames, forcing thousands of people to escape to the beach. Well, that fire front has now moved on, but the town remains cut off and people remain stranded. Well, police say boats and barges are bringing food, water and paramedics, and we also know that 2 naval vessels have been deployed from Sydney. As for the thousands of firefighters on the front line, well, they are taking advantage of slightly cooler conditions today to contain existing blazes, but also prepare for what is set to be another horrendous day on Saturday.
Rochelle Harrison-Pless there reporting on the bushfires in Sydney. Next, the North Korean leader, Kim Jong-un, says he's going to restart nuclear and ballistic missile tests, and this after a 2-year break. Kim also threatened to take what he called shocking new action via a new strategic weapon, But he did stop short of saying he was breaking off nuclear negotiations with the United States. Donald Trump was quick to play down those threats. And tens of thousands of people in Hong Kong marked this first day of the year by protesting. The New Year's March there, the latest in over 6 months of anti-government demonstrations. And the first tear gas of 2020 was fired in Hong Kong just as New Year's Eve celebrations were winding down. Nick Rushworth reports.
They want an independent inquiry into what they say is police brutality, an amnesty for protesters who have been arrested, and a fully independent and democratic Hong Kong. Anger remains on the streets of the city.
I think we want the situation here to be like going to a better place rather than the last half of 6 months. And I hope the government will listen to what the people are actually demanding.
The New Year's Day march followed scuffles on New Year's Eve. Riot police fired rounds of tear gas and rubber bullets in several districts after protesters blocked some roads. The protesters decry Beijing's growing influence in the city, which was promised a degree of autonomy when it returned to Chinese rule in 1997. Beijing denies interference and blames the West for fomenting unrest. Xi Jinping, in a New Year's speech, said he would safeguard Hong Kong's prosperity and stability under the one country, two systems framework.
Our hearts in recent months have been concerned about the situation in Hong Kong. How can people live in peace and enjoy their work without a harmonious and stable environment?
Hong Kong police reject allegations of brutality, saying they have shown restraint in their handling of protests. There have been nearly 6,500 arrests in what is the worst political crisis for the city in decades.
The details as to how exactly Carlos Ghosn made it out of Japan have yet to be made public, but authorities in Lebanon say the business tycoon entered Beirut legally with a French passport and a Lebanese ID card. The usually restrained Japanese media are blasting Ghosn for jumping bail to avoid trial in Japan, but reaction in Lebanon has been more positive. France 24's Leila Milana Allen talked to some people in Beirut.
Feeling of his return, I think he has proved lots of achievements in where he is, where he was actually in leading huge companies in the Far East. I think this whole thing is a game to bring him back. He was detained obviously in Japan, and he came back on a private jet. So I think this whole scheme is a game for him to come back in the country. The people we've been fighting over the past 95 days on the streets for them to leave the Sultan, the power, I think they are the ones behind bringing him back.
I was a little bit disappointed about his the way that he was treated in Japan. At least he could have some human rights. I really appreciate that he came back to the country. I don't know what's going to be next, but I think he didn't get his rights as a human being.
Well, as the world enters 2020, we'll take a minute now to look back at some of the defining events of last year in Africa. From the fall of old regimes to landmark efforts to reshape trade across the region, our Nicolas Jamin reports now on how the continent forged ahead.
In Sudan, after months of protest, Omar al-Bashir was ousted by the military. He had been in power for 30 years. He's been sentenced to 2 years in detention for corruption. A transitional government made up of civilians and military leaders is currently ruling the country. In Algeria, huge demonstrations led to the fall of Abdelaziz Bouteflika. He had been at the helm for 2 decades. Anti-government protests went on all year, even after the presidential election. It was won by Abdelmajid Tebboune, one of Bouteflika's former prime ministers. A few days later, the man thought to be the effective ruler of the country, General Ahmed Gaïd Salah, died aged 79. In Cameroon, main opposition leader Maurice Kamto was arrested in January. He was released 10 months later. The government organised a national dialogue to try and ease tensions in the English-speaking regions. They feel marginalised by President Paul Biya, who's ruled Cameroon for 37 years. The Democratic Republic of Congo witnessed its first peaceful transition with the election of Félix Tshisekedi. but his win was controversial. According to the Catholic Church and several international media outlets, the real winner was Martin Fayulu. In the continent's two biggest economies, the incumbent won the presidential election: Cyril Ramaphosa in South Africa and Muhammadu Buhari in Nigeria. In Senegal, Macky Sall won a second term. In 2019, two Tunisian leaders died, former dictator Ben Ali and President Beji Caid Essebsi. The presidential election in October was won by law professor Kais Saied. Zimbabwean former President Robert Mugabe also died this year. He was 95. He was a famous freedom fighter, but gradually became an authoritarian ruler who stayed in power for nearly 4 decades. In The Hague, the International Criminal Court acquitted former Ivorian President Laurent Gbagbo. The prosecutor appealed, and Gbagbo is currently living in Belgium. In the Sahel region, jihadist attacks were carried out throughout the year. 3 countries especially were targeted: Burkina Faso, Mali and Niger. According to the UN, nearly 1,500 civilians were killed in terrorist attacks in Mali and Burkina Faso this year. The Nobel Peace Prize was awarded to Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed. He made peace with Eritrea and released thousands of political prisoners in his country, where inter-ethnic tensions remain. The African Continental Free Trade Area was launched. All African countries except Eritrea have joined the trade bloc, but its implementation could take some time. In December, it was announced that the CFA franc will change its name and become the ECHO in 8 West African nations. Some financial links with Paris will be cut, but the ECHO will remain pegged to the euro. In the arts world, 2 very different musicians died this year. Ivorian star DJ Arafat was killed in a motorbike accident, while South African singer Johnny Clegg died of cancer. The great Kenyan writer Binyavanga Wainaina passed away. He was only 48. In sports, the Algerian football team won the African Cup of Nations, and South Africa clinched its 3rd Rugby World Cup. For the first time ever, its captain was a black player, Siya Kolisi.
Today is the first day of 2020, and from New Zealand to Los Angeles, people rang in the new year with fireworks, parties, and good wishes. Shirley Sitbon takes a look now at New Year's Eve celebrations around the world.
As far as New Year celebrations go, Rio de Janeiro's Copacabana Beach is as good as it can get, which is why such huge crowds from Brazil and across the globe gathered here once again. Hundreds of people, many dressed in white, dipped into the ocean as the new year kicked in. Something revelers partying in cold New York City wouldn't dream of. Here, the high spot is Times Square, where old tunes and best wishes warmed up the atmosphere. In Paris, the Champs-Élysées was the place to go. And police were also out in numbers, making sure everyone was safe. Getting here was a struggle for many due to strikes in public transportation, but tourists were still delighted.
Coming here to Paris for New Year's was a dream for me. Congratulations and peace for everyone.
This was Cape Town's celebration.
And the thing that I would wish the most for here is more unity for the people. And as I said, health. Health is the most important thing.
While some are still partying, others are now well into the first day of 2020. In Japan, families gathered in temples. This new year is the first in the Reiwa era, under new Emperor Naruhito. An extra reason to pray to keep natural disasters away and bring about peace and prosperity across the world.
Happy New Year to all of you. Thanks for watching France 24. Don't go away.